The hall was cold, the way it always was when the High Council met. The walls were carved from pale gray stone, and the light that came through the narrow windows was thin and colorless. Sira Veilkoth had stood in this room before, many times, for many reasons. But she had never stood here like this, with her hands folded behind her back, and her heart doing something she refused to call fear. Her father sat at the center of the long table. High Consul Drevin Veilkoth was a tall man, with silver ridges along his temples, and eyes the color of old iron. He did not look at her the way a father looks at a daughter. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem he has already solved. "The treaty requires a bond," he said. His voice was flat and clean, the way all Veilthari voices were trained to be. Not a promise, not a signature, a bond, something living, something that cannot be easily undone. Sira did not move. "You mean a marriage," said. "I mean a marriage," he said. The silence that followed was the kind that filled a room completely, the way water fills a cup. Sira stood inside it, and kept her face still. She was very good at keeping her face still. She had been practicing since she was 4 years old. The Veilthari Dominion had spent 11 years at the edge of a war with the Human Federation. Not a full war. There had been no great battles, no burning fleets, no fields of bodies, just pressure. Just the slow and grinding kind of conflict that wore people down without ever giving them the dignity of a clear ending. And now, somehow, both sides had agreed to stop, to talk, to sign things. And the Council, in its great wisdom, had decided that the most permanent signature of all was blood, or the closest thing to it. Sira had known, somewhere in the back of her mind, that something like this was coming. She had heard the whispers. She had seen the way the older counselors looked at her in the corridors, measuring, calculating, as if she were a piece on a board being moved into position. But knowing a thing is coming and having it arrive are two very different experiences. "His name is Connor Price," said Counselor Veth, a narrow-faced woman on the far left of the table. She slid a small data card across the stone surface. A human, age 31. He served as a field medic in the border conflict for 6 years. Decorated. No title, no family wealth, but his record was considered qua. She paused, as if the next word tasted strange. Suitable. Sira looked at the card without touching it. She did not need to. She already knew what she would find there. A human face, unfamiliar and soft, with eyes that held none of the cold discipline her people valued. A person chosen not for his standing or his bloodline, but for the fact that he was, apparently, a decent man. Which meant, by Veilthari standards, that he was nothing. She picked up the card. She looked at the face. He had brown hair, and an ordinary sort of face. He was not imposing. He did not look like a warrior. He looked like someone who repaired things, and was kind to animals, and probably had a garden somewhere. "This is who you have chosen," she said. It was not a question. "This is who the Federation has offered," her father said, "and we have accepted." Her brother Kayvon was standing near the window. She had not looked at him yet, because she already knew the expression he would be wearing. She looked now. She was right. There was a small, satisfied smile at the corner of his mouth, the kind he always wore when something had gone wrong for her and right for him. "The great Sira Veilkoth," he said quietly, "bonded to a human medic. The stars must be laughing." "Kayvon," their father said, in a tone that ended the sentence, but did not remove the wound. Sira said nothing. She set the data card back down on the table, with the precise and careful movement of someone who is not going to let a single thing show. The rest of the meeting was logistics. Dates, locations, protocols, the specific language of the ceremony. Sira listened to all of it. She filed it away. She nodded when nodding was required, and remained silent when silence was sufficient. She was the perfect Veilthari daughter, even now, even in this moment, which was perhaps the most humiliating of her life. When it was over, she walked out of the hall and down the long corridor that led to the observation deck. She walked with her back straight and her steps even, and she did not let herself hurry until she was alone. The observation deck overlooked the capital station's eastern face. From here, you could see the sprawl of the city below, and if the sky was clear, the faint pale arc of the moon beyond it. Tonight, the sky was not clear. There were clouds, low and dark, moving slowly across the stars. Sira stood at the glass and breathed. She had been trained, from childhood, to treat her emotions the way a soldier treats a wound, not by ignoring it entirely, but by dealing with it efficiently and then moving on. Grief was permitted for exactly as long as it was necessary. Anger was a tool, not a state. Want and need were weaknesses to be recorded and then quietly removed. She ran through the facts. She was to be married to a human. She would live for the foreseeable future in Federation space. She would be expected to represent the Dominion in this bond, which meant she could not fail, could not crack, could not give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would endure this man, this Connor Price, with his ordinary face and his field medic record, the same way she had endured everything else in her life. With stillness, with patience, with the specific and practiced art of feeling nothing loudly. She said his name out loud, once, just to hear how it sounded. It was a short name. 2 syllables, both of them soft. It sounded nothing like any Veilthari name she had ever known. It sounded like something from a quieter world. Somewhere behind the clouds, the stars were still there. Sira looked in the direction she knew, mathematically, the human Federation space to be. She thought about the man who was, right now, somewhere out there, probably in some plain room, being told the same news she had just received. She wondered what his face looked like when he heard it. She wondered if he had a family who would tell him to be proud. She wondered if he already knew her name. It did not matter. She would fulfill the obligation. She would be precisely as present as the treaty required, and nothing more. She would not let him see her clearly, because no one was permitted to see her clearly. She would not let herself feel anything about this, because feeling things about this would not change it. She would endure him. That was what she decided, standing alone in the dark, with the clouds covering the stars, and her father's voice still quiet in the back of her mind. She did not allow herself to wonder if enduring was going to be enough. The neutral station at the border of Veilthari and Federation space was called Halveth Point. It was not a beautiful place. It was functional. All metal corridors and recycled air, and the constant low hum of life support doing its job. The kind of place people pass through on their way to somewhere better. Sira arrived with 2 attendants and a small case of things she had been told she would need. She wore the formal gray of her house, high-collared and precise, and she kept her face in the expression she had been wearing since she was very young, composed, distant, and entirely unreachable. The reception hall was set up with the minimum required decoration for a diplomatic ceremony. A long table, some chairs, 2 flags, 1 Veilthari, 1 Federation, an officiating delegate from a third neutral party, a thin man with pale hands who kept looking at his notes. Sira stood on her side of the room and surveyed the human contingent across from her. And then she saw him. She had looked at the data card. She had known what his face looked like. But somehow she had still been expecting someone else. Someone loud, or puffed up, or wearing too many medals. Someone who would look at her with the hungry kind of attention that high-caste men always had, that feeling of being assessed like property. Kara Price was standing slightly to the side of the Federation group, away from the officials and the diplomats. He was not in a military uniform. He was wearing a plain dark jacket over simple clothes, and he had a small paper book in his hands that he was reading. Not performing the action of reading, actually absorbed in the thing, in the quiet way of someone who had simply found a way to be calm while waiting. He looked up. He saw her. He tucked the book away, quickly, but not nervously, like a man who had been caught doing something ordinary and had no reason to be embarrassed about it. And then he did something she had not expected. He bowed. Not the short, barely there diplomatic nod that the officials on his side of the room offered. A real bow. Slow, deliberate, angled low, in a way that was clearly meant to signal genuine respect rather than political performance. It was the Veilthari bow. He had learned it. She did not know when or why or who had taught him, but he had learned the correct form, and he had done it cleanly. She inclined her head in return, because the protocol required it, but something behind her eyes had shifted slightly. The ceremony was brief. The neutral delegate read the formal language in both Federation Standard and Veilthari, stumbling only once. Sira spoke her vows in the flat, measured tone used for official proceedings. She did not add warmth to them, because warmth was not required, and because she did not have any to spare. Connor spoke his vows slowly, not because he seemed uncertain, but because he seemed, strangely, to mean them. Each word was placed carefully, like something being put in the right position rather than simply recited. She noticed this. She did not let herself react to it. Afterward, the reception moved to an adjoining room. There was food and drink, and the low murmur of diplomats talking to other diplomats about things that were not the marriage they had all just witnessed. Sira stood near the far wall and waited for the minimum polite duration to expire. She felt him before she saw him, or rather, she noticed the absence of noise that accompanied him. He approached without the usual collection of sounds that people make when they want to be noticed. He simply appeared at her side, held out a small glass, and waited. It was the Veilthari ceremonial blend. Pale amber, slightly bitter, served correctly at room temperature, not the human drinks that were lined up on the far table. She looked at the glass. Then she looked at him. I wasn't sure about the temperature, he said. I read that it served at room temperature, but I didn't know if that was a hard rule or more of a preference thing. It is a preference, she said. Room temperature is correct. He nodded. Good. Then I got lucky. She took the glass because refusing it would have been a statement, and she did not want to make statements tonight. She drank a small amount. It was right. It was exactly right. You researched this, she said. I researched a lot of things, he said, not proudly, just honestly. He did not follow that sentence with a list of all the things he had researched, the way someone seeking credit would have done. He simply left it there and looked at the room, and was quiet. It was a specific kind of quiet, not the silence of someone who had run out of things to say, but the silence of someone who understood that not everything needed to be filled. She studied him from the side of her eye. He was taller than she had expected. There was a scar along his left hand, small and old, from something that had healed correctly. He had the look of someone who had been tired for a long time, and had simply gotten used to it. Are you all right? He asked. She turned to look at him fully. The question was so simple, so direct. In Veilthari culture, that question was never asked in public, and rarely in private. It was considered an imposition, an assumption that the other person might not be managing themselves. To ask someone if they were all right was to suggest that they looked like they weren't. I am fine, she said. He nodded. He did not press her, did not search her face for the truth behind the answer, did not offer a follow-up designed to pull something out of her that she hadn't offered. He simply accepted what she said and went quiet again. It unsettled her. She had prepared for pushback. She had prepared for awkwardness and noise, and the kind of relentless, cheerful trying that humans were supposed to be known for. She had not prepared for this, for a man who simply asked and then let her answer stand. The reception ended. The diplomats shook hands and signed the remaining paperwork and filed out one by one. Sira was shown to the guest quarters, separate from his, as she had arranged through the protocol team weeks in advance. The rooms were small and identical, and smelled of recycled air and nothing personal. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. She thought about the bow, the one he had learned, correctly, in advance, for a ceremony he had probably not wanted to attend any more than she had. She thought about the glass of Valfari blend, prepared to the right temperature, by a man who could have simply handed her something from the human table and called it good enough. She thought about the question, the plain, quiet, devastating simplicity of, "Are you all right?" No one had ever asked her that. Not her father, not her brother, not any of the men she had been paraded in front of over the years, each of them evaluating her for bloodline and composure, and the political value of her name. She had spent her entire life in rooms full of people who needed things from her, and none of them had ever turned to her and asked that one small question. She told herself it meant nothing. Humans ask questions like that automatically, without thinking, the way some animals made sounds out of reflex. It was not personal. It was not real. It was simply what they did. She told herself this for a long time. She was still telling herself when she finally fell asleep. The colony was called Duran's Post. It sat on a mid-rim world with a warm yellow sun and a lot of flat open land that smelled like dust and something faintly sweet when the wind came in from the south. It was not a grand place. It was not the kind of place that appeared in history books or diplomatic records. It was the kind of place where ordinary people lived ordinary lives in small houses with practical gardens. The house they were given was low and wide with a pale front door and a kitchen that got the morning light. Sira stood in the doorway on the first day and looked at it for a long moment and thought that it was the least Valthari thing she had ever seen. And then she went inside, because there was nothing else to do. The first few weeks were quiet, in a way that felt like waiting. They moved around each other in the house with the careful precision of two people who were not yet sure of the rules. Sira stayed in her room for long portions of the day, working through the diplomatic correspondence that came in from the Dominion, maintaining her routines, keeping herself organized. Connor, for his part, did not hover. He was present. She could hear him in other parts of the house, hear the particular sounds of him doing ordinary things, but he did not knock on her door, did not find reasons to be in whatever room she was in, did not try to fill the space between them with forced conversation. She noticed this. She had been prepared to set firm lines, to make clear what was her space and what was shared. She had not needed to, because he had already drawn the same lines on his own. He cooked. That was the first real thing she learned about him. He cooked in the mornings and sometimes in the evenings, and in the beginning the results were imperfect. Too much of something, or not enough of another. The balance slightly off, in a way she could not fully explain to him, because Valthari flavor language did not translate neatly. He asked her, after the third evening, what she would change. She told him, briefly and without expecting anything to come of it. The next evening, he had changed exactly those things. He had made a small card and taped it to the inside of one of the cabinet doors. It had her dietary needs on it, the ones that were requirements and the ones that were preferences. It was written in his handwriting, which was cramped and practical. She stood in the kitchen one morning, after he had left for the day, and read the card twice. She did not know what to do with the way it made her feel, so she put the feeling somewhere small and went back to work. The days built on each other. She began, without deciding to notice things about him. Not important things, Not the kind of things you observe when you are assessing someone for threat or value. Small things. The way he sat with the problem quietly, instead of attacking it, turning it over in his mind until a solution came to him naturally. The way he kept a small notebook, dark green, slightly worn at the corners, that he carried in his jacket pocket. She had seen him write in it, but she had never been close enough to see what. She assumed it was work-related. Practical things. Lists. One afternoon, a structural collapse happened at the eastern edge of the colony. An old building in the trades district, weakened by the previous winter, had come down without warning. Sierra watched from a distance as the colony's emergency teams mobilized, and she watched Connor go with them. Not because anyone called him, but because he simply put on his jacket and went. She stayed back, because she was not familiar enough with the terrain or the local protocols to help, and because she had learned that inserting herself into unfamiliar emergency situations without knowledge was more obstruction than assistance. So she stayed, and she watched from the ridge above the district. He worked for 4 hours. She could see him from where she stood, a figure in a dark jacket, moving between the rubble with the rescue teams, carrying things, pulling things, kneeling beside people in ways that suggested he was talking to them, or checking injuries, or both. He did not stop. She watched the other workers rotate out to rest, watched them come back, watched the whole organized movement of a rescue effort. And through all of it, he was there. Constant. Just present and working. One of the Valthari observers who had been stationed at the colony for the treaty documentation period was standing a short distance from Sierra. She heard the woman say, in Valthari, in a flat tone that meant she was trying not to sound impressed, "He did not stop." Sierra said nothing. She already knew. Connor came home in the late evening. He had dust on him and a small bandage on his forearm that he had applied himself. He came in, saw her at the table, nodded, and went to shower. He came back in clean clothes, ate the food she had left covered on the counter for him. She had not planned to do that. She had simply done it. And then he sat across from her and asked how her day had been. Not, "Did you see me out there?" Not, "The rescue went well." Just, "How was your day?" She told him it had been quiet. They sat together for a while in the evening light, and she thought, watching him, that she had never seen a person be so completely without the need to be noticed. That was the evening she noticed the notebook had fallen off the counter near the door. She saw it there the next morning. He had left early, and it had slipped from his jacket pocket onto the floor. She picked it up to put it on the counter, and it opened in her hands. She did not mean to look. She looked. The page it opened to had her name at the top. Beneath her name, there was a list. Things she liked. She recognized a few of the entries from passing comments she had made weeks ago. Things she had said once, without thinking, and never repeated. There was a pronunciation guide for Valthari words, old and practice-looking, like it had been there since the beginning. And near the bottom of the page, in the cramped and practical handwriting she was beginning to recognize. "She's not cold. There's a difference." Sierra stood in the kitchen and held the notebook and read those words 3 times. She closed it. She placed it back exactly where it had been on the floor, at the same angle, as if it had just fallen. She stood up and went to put the kettle on. The water heated. The morning light came through the kitchen window the way it always did. Outside, the colony was waking up around her, making its ordinary sounds. She stood at the counter and felt something shift inside her, quietly, without fanfare, the way something shifts when a door that has been locked for a long time is opened just a little. Not all the way, just enough to let in a thin line of light. She told herself it was nothing, but she did not entirely believe herself anymore. The message from the Dominion came on a gray morning when the wind was doing something cold and restless outside the windows. Sierra read it at the kitchen table while her tea went cold beside her. She read it twice, then put the datapad face down on the table, and sat very still for a moment. Her brother Kayvon had moved a formal motion before the High Council. The motion called for a review of the treaty bond, specifically the marriage, on the grounds that it had produced no measurable political benefit in the months since its signing. The language was careful and official, but Sira knew her brother well enough to read what lived behind the careful words. This was not about the treaty. This was about her. Kayvon had found a match he wanted her placed in, a warlord of the northern fleets, a man with ships and soldiers, and the kind of influence that would move Kayvon's own position forward considerably. The marriage to Connor was in the way. She was being summoned back to the capital for a formal tribunal. She sat with this for a long time. She thought about what it meant, not just for the treaty, but for the specific and fragile things she had been building, without meaning to, in this house, in this kitchen, in this life that had started as an obligation, and had quietly become something else. She thought about the notebook. She thought about the card on the cabinet door. She thought about 4 hours of not stopping in the dust and the rubble, and coming home and asking how her day was. She got up and went to pack. She did not tell him. She planned not to. It was her matter, her family, her world. She would handle it herself, the Veilthari way, alone and without burdening anyone else with it. She pulled out her travel case and began to fold things into it with the efficient and practiced movements of someone who had packed and left many times in her life. She heard him in the doorway. She did not turn around. "I have to go back to the capital," she said. "It is a political matter. You do not need to be involved." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning, early." "I'd like to come," he said. "I'm not saying I have to. If you tell me not to, I'll stay here and wait. But I wanted you to know that I'm willing to go." She turned around then. He was standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and he had the look on his face that she had come to recognize, the one that meant he had already thought about this before speaking, and he meant exactly what he was saying, and nothing more. "It will not be comfortable for you," she said. "The council does not respect humans. My brother will be deliberately unpleasant." "I've dealt with unpleasant before," he said. "It could become more than unpleasant." "Sira." He said her name in the way he always did, correctly, carefully, with a slight pause before it, as if he were giving it the space it deserved. "I'm not asking you to protect me from it. I'm just asking if I can come." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the reasons to say no. There were good reasons, practical reasons, reasons that made complete sense by every rule she had been raised with. "Be ready before sunrise," she said. The Veilthari capital received them with the full weight of its formality. The council chambers were precisely as cold and gray as Sira had spent her life inside them. The officials received her with the correct level of acknowledgement and received Connor with barely concealed contempt. Short nods, eyes that passed over him like he was a piece of furniture that had been placed in the wrong room. Kayvon was already there. Her brother was dressed in full house regalia, high collar and dark silver, and he looked exactly as he always looked, composed, superior, and faintly amused in the way of a man who believes every room belongs to him. His eyes moved from Sira to Connor, and a small smile settled on his face. "The medic," he said, in Federation standard, so that Connor could understand every word. I had expected someone more impressive, though I suppose the Federation's standards for what constitutes a suitable match are somewhat different from ours. Connor looked at him with a calm, level expression. "Good morning," he said. It was the most neutral response possible. Not hostile, not deferential. Kayvon's smile thinned slightly, because he had expected to produce a reaction and had not. The tribunal opened formally. Kayvon laid out his argument with the polished efficiency of a man who had prepared thoroughly and enjoyed every moment of the preparation. The marriage was unproductive. The human was without standing. The bond served no purpose that could not be better served by a more strategically valuable match. He spoke for a long time, and he was very good at it. Sira sat straight in her chair and held herself the way she had been trained to hold herself, perfectly still, perfectly composed, showing nothing. But she was aware, the whole time, of Connor sitting beside her, not speaking, not reacting to Kayvon's words, even when those words were specifically designed to provoke. At one point, when the questioning turned particularly sharp, and Sira felt the old familiar pressure of her composure beginning to crack at its edges, the particular weight of being in this room, with these people, who had never once in her life looked at her and seen a person rather than an asset. She felt something at the edge of her hand. Not a grip, not a claim, just the side of his hand resting against hers on the armrest, barely touching, simply there. She did not move her hand away. When Kayvon finished, the neutral delegate asked if the respondent wished to speak. Kayvon glanced at Sira, expecting her to respond. Connor spoke instead. He spoke in the plain, unpolished way he did everything. No formal phrasing, no political structure, no carefully balanced rhetoric. He said that he had entered the marriage with the intention of honoring it fully. He said that Sira had been more than anyone had ever asked her to be, in circumstances that had required a great deal of her. He said that no political formula had the right to reduce a person to a position on a board, to be moved when convenient and discarded when something better came along. And he said that if the council wished to dissolve the treaty, they would need a better reason than one man's ambition. The room was very quiet when he finished. Kayvon's face had gone still, in the specific way that meant he was angry and managing it. He called Connor insolent. Connor inclined his head slightly and said, "Probably." A sound moved through the chamber, not quite a reaction, but close to one. At the far end of the table, the eldest counselor, a woman so old her silver ridges had gone white, who had not spoken once during the entire proceeding, raised one thin hand. The room settled. She looked at Connor for a long moment, the way a person looks at something they are trying to understand. Then she looked at Sira, and in a voice that was quiet and entirely serious, she asked, "Does this man honor you?" The question landed in Sira's chest like something dropped from a great height. She opened her mouth. The correct Veilthari answer was already formed, something diplomatic, something managed, something that would neither confirm nor deny, and would protect her from the vulnerability of being seen. She tried to say it. She could not. For the first time in her life, in front of the council, in front of her brother, in front of the man sitting beside her, Sira Veilkoff could not make herself say the thing that wasn't true. The recess was called before Sira had to answer. The eldest counselor lowered her hand, and the neutral delegate announced a short pause. And the room broke apart into the low murmur of people repositioning themselves. Kayvon moved toward his advisors. The officials gathered near the doors. Sira stood and walked out of the chamber into the side corridor that ran behind it. And she stood there in the narrow gray hallway with the cold stone walls and the thin overhead light, and she breathed. She heard his steps behind her. She knew them by now, the specific weight of them, not loud, not hesitant. She did not turn around. "You don't have to talk," he said. "I just didn't want you to be out here by yourself." She was quiet for a moment. Somewhere in the chamber behind them, she could hear Kayvon's voice, low and precise, speaking to his advisors. She had grown up with that voice. She had spent 30 years moving carefully around the person who owned it. She was so tired of it. "I don't know how to do this," she said. Her voice came out differently than she intended. Not flat, not managed, just plain, just the truth of it, without the architecture she usually built around every sentence. "Do what?" he asked, and his voice was careful the way it always was, not trying to lead her anywhere. "This," she said, and she turned around. "Any of it. I was trained to endure things, to manage them, to perform whatever was required, and feel none of it. That is what I know how to do. I do not know how to be in something that is—" She stopped. She tried again. "I keep waiting for the reason, the thing underneath, the part where I find out what you want from this, what you're working toward. Everyone wants something. Every person in every room I have ever been in has wanted something from me, and the only question is always how long before they show it." He listened. When she stopped, he let the silence sit for a moment before he spoke. "I'm not working toward anything," he said. "I know that's probably not an easy thing to believe, but it's true." "Then why?" she asked. It came out more raw than she meant it to. "The notebook, the tea, the card on the cabinet door, coming here today, standing in that room and saying what you said. You did not have to say any of that. No one required any of that from you. So why?" He thought about it. She could see him thinking about it. Not performing consideration, actually sitting with the question. "Someone decided you were a piece to be moved," he said finally. "Somewhere a long time ago, someone looked at you and thought about what you were worth to them, and that became the whole story. And that always seemed wrong to me. It didn't seem like a thing that needed a complicated reason." She looked at him in the dim light of the corridor and felt something she did not have a word for in either language she spoke. Not gratitude exactly, not relief exactly. Something older and more necessary than both of those things. "I don't know how to let people in," she said. "I was taught not to. I was taught that needing things was weakness, and that showing it was worse." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm just here. That's all I'm doing." She looked at the floor. Then she looked back up at him. "The scar on my jaw," she said. It was the hardest sentence she had ever begun. "I was 12. I lost a training match, and I cried. My instructor gave me that mark for it. She said that a Veilthari who shows pain in public is a liability. I believed her. I have believed her every day since then." But his face did the thing that she had noticed it did when something genuinely affected him. A very small shift around his eyes, barely visible, like something moving quietly behind still water. "She was wrong," he said. Just that. No speech around it. Syrah said nothing, but something in her chest loosened by 1 degree. The specific degree that had been locked since she was 12 years old, and had stood in front of her instructor and decided, that day, that she would never give anyone that kind of evidence again. The recess ended. They went back into the chamber. The eldest counselor called the room to order. Kayvon presented his final arguments, and they were still sharp, still polished, still very good, but the room felt different from before. The moment the eldest counselor had asked her question, something had shifted in the air of the tribunal, and Kayvon could feel it, even if he could not name it. The deliberation was not long. The motion was reviewed, the grounds were examined, and at the end of it, the council ruled that the treaty stood, and the marriage bond with it. Kayvon's motion was rejected. The warlord match was not mentioned again. Kayvon received the verdict with the rigid composure of a man who knew how to lose without showing it, and left the chamber without looking at Syrah directly. She watched him go. She felt for the first time in a very long time like she had not lost something today. The journey home was long. They took the slow route, a supply transport rather than a diplomatic vessel, because the schedule had changed and it was what was available. The transport was narrow and practical, with small bunks along one corridor and a common area that smelled like engine oil and reheated food. Syrah took the bunk assigned to her and lay down, and she did not realize how exhausted she was until the darkness behind her eyes became sleep. She slept for hours. It was the deepest sleep she had had in weeks. The kind that comes when something you have been bracing against has finally passed. She woke to the corridor light going amber, which meant late evening by the ship's clock. She lay still for a moment, oriented herself, and then she noticed the small shelf beside her bunk. There was a cup on it, covered, to keep it warm. Veilthari tea blend, pale amber, exactly right. She had not told him she wanted tea. She had been asleep. She had no idea how he had known to make it, or how he had timed it so precisely, except that he had been paying attention, the same close and quiet attention he had been paying since the beginning, the kind that required no announcement and asked for nothing back. She picked up the cup with both hands. She held it for a long time. She thought about the girl who had stood on the observation deck of the Veilthari capital and stared out at the stars and decided she would endure the man she was being sent to marry. She thought about that girl's cold certainty, the armor of it, and how necessary that armor had felt, and how much it had cost to wear it every single day. She almost felt sorry for her. Back on Durin's post, life resumed. The colony went about its ordinary business under its warm yellow sun. The house had the same pale front door, the same kitchen with the morning light. Syrah's diplomatic correspondence continued to arrive. Connor went back to his work at the colony's small medical station. But things were different in the small and important ways. She started leaving her door open in the mornings. She started asking, occasionally, what he was working on, and listening to the answer. She started saying things that were true, instead of just things that were adequate. It was slow and imperfect, and sometimes she caught herself closing off again out of habit, pulling back the words before they could land. But she noticed when she did it, which was new. Noticing was the beginning. He, for his part, did not remark on any of it. He did not catalogue her progress, or express relief when she opened up, or show disappointment when she pulled back. He simply remained, steady and unhurried, the same person at the end of every day that he had been at the beginning, which was something she had not known people could be. There was an evening, some weeks later, when they sat together on the low step outside the back of the house, and watched the sun go down over the flat land. The sky went orange, and then pink, and then a deep quiet blue. Neither of them said anything for a long time. She thought about the treaty that had made them strangers. She thought about the ceremony on a cold station at the edge of two worlds, and the bow she had not expected, and the glass at the right temperature, and all the 100 ordinary moments that had accumulated between then and now, like stones placed carefully one on top of another, until they became something solid. Two people from different stars, learning the same language one word at a time. Not a grand language, not the language of politics or treaties or duty, the simple one. The one that said, "You are here, and I see you, and that is enough." The sun finished going down. The stars came out one by one over the flat land of Durin's post. Syrah looked up at them and did not, for the first time in a very long time, feel like she was standing alone beneath them. That was enough.